But fear not, we have the settings set up so that only those of us who are unmuted and speaking into the little yellow box will appear in that recording. So you are not being recorded for posterity, but please do stay muted and use the chat box. At any point throughout the evening, any questions you have, post them in the chat. Davith and I will be storing those up and we will pose them for you at the end of the evening. So make liberal use of that chat function. And then last of all, before I turn things over to Davith to introduce our guest authors this evening, a note of gratitude to all of you. It has been a long and hard year in the world of independent bookselling and really any small businesses. And the fact that we're still here and can still present these programs for you is really thanks to the continued efforts and support of our customers. And that's you. We couldn't do this without you. So thank you so much for your support. Without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Davith to introduce our author.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. It is my pleasure to introduce Mariah Fredericks for the release of her new book, The Death of a Showman. She is the author of the Jane Prescott mystery series set in Gilded Age New York City. The penultimate installment, Death of an American Beauty, was just nominated for the 2021 Mary Higgins Clark Award. It's a real pleasure to see that books that were published right at the beginning of the lockdown are now getting the attention that they deserve, and we felt really bad about them all. The Death of a Showman is the fourth installment in the series. It has already been called a delight, a lively upstairs-downstairs mystery, and that it is told with understated elegance. And we are very lucky to be joined for this event by Clare McHugh, author of the debut novel, A Most English Princess, an immersive novel about the eldest daughter of Queen Victoria. Please join me in welcoming to Northshire, Clare McHugh and Mariah Fredericks.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful introduction. Before Clare and I begin our conversation, I thought I would read just a little bit from the book to give everyone just a taste of Jane and her world. This scene takes place in the very beginning of the book. Jane and her employers, William and Louise Tyler, have just returned from a glittering wedding in Europe. The year is 1914, and Jane is looking back on everything that she left behind before she departed for Europe, namely a boy named Leo. I was proud of how I had managed the issue of Mr. Hirschfeld. Yes, I had enjoyed his company more than I should have last summer, given that I made a vow not to see him again. But as he pointed out, I had never told him I wasn't going to see him again. And did I really want to spend the whole summer having no fun? Maybe it didn't speak well of my character, but it turned out I didn't. I only had one day off a week. How much trouble could I get into on one day off? The answer was, in the company of Leo Hirschfeld, enough to feel guilty when I remembered Clara, a studious girl with strong views on education, whom his mother often invited to supper. So, before leaving for Europe, I gave Leo a well-practiced speech in which I reminded him of Clara's qualities and expectations, and said it was best if we parted for good. Leo said I was being pompous. We had been walking back from the movie theater where he played piano, reaching the point where I turned for the Tyler house and he for the train. He said for the 134th time, "I'm not marrying Clara. I'm not marrying anyone." Anyone. Yes, it was not only Clara. There were, after all, 7 days in the week, and I only took up one. Wishing him the best of luck with his music and his theater career, I started walking. He ran after me, caught hold of my arm. He looked unexpectedly serious, and for a moment, declaration was in the air. I don't want to say the things everybody says, he told me. Disappointed, I reclaimed my arm. No, that would be very dull. Now, as I rode back to the Tylers, I felt certain I had done the right thing. One misspent summer might be excused. Two would be, Well, I couldn't decide between the words stupid and immoral, so I decided on pointless. Above all, I had avoided my worst nightmare, in which Leo looked deeply into my eyes and said he was sorry, but he was marrying Clara next month, and I was devastated because somehow on my one day off, I had fallen in love with him. In another imagining, Leo said he had found a better foxtrotter than me, so our Fridays were over. I was no less devastated. No, I thought, foxtrot or matrimony, it was a very good thing I had avoided that. I entered the house through the kitchen to hear Louise say, "Oh, perhaps we shouldn't tell her." And William, "No, better that she hears it from us." Sorrowful, I thought, kind. This was someone they knew well, this person with bad news coming to her. I was suddenly aware of my heartbeat, hard and hurtful in my chest. We had been out of the country for months. Anything might have happened. No, not anything, something awful, something death. Without thinking, I pushed open the door between the kitchen and the dining room. Louise and William looked up. Between them, they held a newspaper. "Has something happened?" I asked. Reluctantly, Louise showed me. Follies star Netta Fisk joins Warburton and Hirschfeld's Two Loves Have I, cast to include songwriters Chorus Girl Bride. My first response was to exhale in relief. The word death was nowhere on the page. This was the art section, full of jaunty headlines about hits and flops. Bride, there was a happy word, and star, songwriter. Slowly, I took in the first paragraph. Comic actress Netta Fisk joins the cast of Sidney Warburton's ragtime extravaganza, featuring songs by But on Fridays composer Leo Hirschfeld. The show, set for an August 4th opening, boasts a glittering cast, including the composer's wife, chorus girl Violet Tempest. The pair married 6 months ago. After meeting on the show, Everybody Does It. The composer's wife. Leo had gotten married, the man who said he would never marry, and he had not married intelligent, sensible Clara, of whom his mother approved, but a woman of such abundant charms, she had been dubbed Jelly on Pins, Salome on Stairs, and the weary man's hope. From the article, I gathered that Violet Tempest's chief talent was walking downstairs wearing very little, and in a manner that, according to the Times, made grown men weep. Her views on education were probably quite rudimentary. And there is the first catastrophe of Death of a Showman.
Hi, Mariah. I'm so glad that I'm here to talk to you about this wonderful book, which I read. I want to comes up mirrored, Death of a Showman. A beautiful cover. Tell us, what were your ambitions for the book? What did you really want it to be about, and what did you want it to be like?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Well, Death of an American Beauty, the book just before this, was a very dramatic book with a lot of pain. Jane's uncle was accused of murder. Women close to her died in a very difficult way. And for this one, I knew that she was going to be coming back and Leo would be launching his first big show. So that already suggested sort of something more lighthearted, frothier, funnier, full of romance. But I also knew that we're in summer 1914, so war is going to be breaking out. So I wanted, originally the book was going to be set in the middle of Europe as the war broke out. I was going to have the Tylers right there. But my editor felt it would be best to be in New York. And really that works much better to have our young, frivolous Americans in New York while war is simmering into reality and being sort of, heedlessly, wonderfully caught up in other things. All that is taking place over there. This is also a time, 1914, where people are being fed idealized visions of life on a level that they really haven't in the past. You have, yes, theater, yes, novels, but now you have phonograph records, you have movies. So I really wanted to explore that weird relationship between what pop culture shows you of romance and women, and what the really messy reality of love and all those dynamics is. So,
well, I have several responses to that because I do think that you accomplished what you set out to be, because the book is very ebullient. But we as readers know that the war is going to be a big deal, which they don't know.
Right.
Let's return to that challenge, but I can't before I say that I think that everyone who's met Jane before will be so happy to meet her again in this book. But you are catering to people who might pick up this book as the first of the Jane mysteries, yes?
Yes. I think you can absolutely read this as a standalone. What you need to know about Jane is that she is one in a very long line of serving servants who are smarter than perhaps the people she serves. Although Louise and William they're not stupid people, but they're intensely sheltered, and part of their journey is connecting in with the real world. So Jane often goes to great lengths to protect them and boost them and solve the crises when dead bodies turn up in their lives. So, I mean, once you know all that, you can leap into her world.
In that way, I compare you to Woodhouse. I think Jeeves has there's an aspect to Jane. Of course, I like the fact that she's a woman and, like so many women, often reads a room perfectly. But I wanted to ask you also, did you, beyond Woodhouse, who do you feel like you are influenced by as a mystery writer or a writer in general?
Oh, I was gonna say anybody who does Gilded Age, I would hope has read Edith Wharton, because she's so funny. I remember having to read her in high school and thinking, oh, I actually enjoy this book, even if I have to read it for class, because she's very subversive and her observations about people are so acid and perceptive, and she doesn't pull her punches, but she's never needlessly cruel, which is something that I do kind of aim for with Jane. I mean, she has massive compassion, even if she has a very, very shrewd eye for the world that she is writing about. In terms of mystery readers, Sarah Caldwell, I think, is wonderful in terms of just the brilliance of her style, and the way that she handles some very dippy, wayward characters in a very loving way. And another person that I love is Minette Walters. You don't know Scold's Bridal and The Sculptress.
Maybe The Sculptress. Let me write this down.
She does the dark side of seemingly normal people next door so well, and what can drive people to truly gruesome acts. And I always find that really interesting. I can remember with Agatha Christie, the thing that really drew me to her was sort of the ordinariness often of her suspect cast. You know, they're the bird watcher, they're the irritating lady next door. And sometimes you have to, the question is, how could such a boring person inspire such loathing and fear that someone would feel they had to take their life? And that question always interests me.
Absolutely, and I do think you're deft with the way the characters show their potential, different potentials. But I would also say that you're an author who loves your character. Well, many of them, you have a great deal of affection for them. Even Leo, who's, you know, sort of blinded by love, but I wanted to,
or something,
or some blood. We all love. You know, this is your fourth time around with Jane. And she is a very appealing person. You told me the other day she sprung out of your head, pretty much all way formed. But how do you keep her interesting to you? You know, she, as the books go on, she has to show new dimensions after all.
Yes, and that is, I'm not going to call it a challenge, but it's something to consider. You know, Jane came to me, and this sounds really creative writer woo-woo, but she really came to me. And there are times when I think, you know, these are her stories. I'm just the typist. And when she came to me, it was very much as a person that nobody noticed, who knew the truth about a famous crime of the century. And I thought, well, who would be in a position to see people doing awful things, but nobody would worry about them seeing and hearing certain things? I thought, oh, a servant, you know. I always remember that wonderful, if people remember I, Claudius, when they were first filming I, Claudius, I read this in Sean Phillips' memoir. The cast was horrified because they thought it was so over the top. It was going to destroy their careers. You know, Sean Phillips, Brian Blessed, Derek Jacobi, they're like, this is nuts. And Sean Phillips, who plays Livia, the most murderous member of the Imperial Roman family, flipped out at the writer one day. And she said, this script is not playable. You know, we're poisoning each other, we're stabbing each other, we're committing adultery right and left, we're plotting treason, and the room is full of people. Like, how am I supposed to play this? And he said, Sean, you are playing the most powerful woman in the world. These people are not people to you, they're servants, which means they're household items. You know, you would not worry about what you did and said in front of your toaster, and that's how you have to treat them. So I thought, let's write a murder mystery from the point of view of a toaster. But to your question, how do you keep that essential dynamic over the course of a series when, you know, surely people are going to start to notice that Jane seems to solve a lot of murder mysteries. At the end of the book, at this book, William and Louise decide to send her for more education, and I'm deciding where that will take her. But I think she'll always be in the orbit of the Tylers.
Yeah. Well, Mariah, I think your books will be as long-lasting as I, Claudius. I read it, I watched it again the other day, and it really does stand up the test of time.
It's fabulous.
The things that, as a historical novelist myself, I am a little bit judgmental about people who try to write novels and mysteries set in the past, because I don't want the vocabulary to be wrong. I don't want the mindset to be wrong. And I want people in the past didn't know what was going to happen. So one of the things I admired about your book was that you kept World War I, this terrible, you know, rolling thunder crowd that was going to take over the whole world, sort of in abeyance. Certainly deliberate, but what other challenges do you feel like you had to keep the history the way people would have felt it when they were there?
Well, one thing I always like to do is, because mysteries usually take place in a very tight time frame, is I can go back and look at what was on the cover of the New York Times for every day that the story is occurring. And even though I knew America was fairly self-obsessed at this time and not so concerned with matters abroad, I was even shocked by how little the Great War and the coming of the war was on the front page. In New York, we were completely obsessed with the murder trial of Florence Carmen, who shot her wife's lover in his medical practice. So that always keeps me honest. In terms of language, there's this wonderful thing, anybody who writes historical fiction should know about it, called the Engram Viewer.
Yes, I love that you explain it.
It's if you Google Engram Viewer, it'll take you to the site, and what you can do if you're not sure about a particular word is put it in, and they will show you how many times it comes up in books through decades, I think for like 200 years. And if I'm trying to think of a word that I had to, I don't know, maybe telescopic, maybe that was a word. I thought, wait a minute, how much would people really have used that? And it'll tell you.
Yeah, I love the word Zoom. Zoom is not a Victorian word. Drip is also, describing someone as a drip is very new. So, and a couple of those missteps, if you make the missteps, I feel like you break the dream for people that it's really that it's taking place in the past. And historical fiction, historical mysteries get a bad name because people think, well, it's so easy, especially when you're writing a novel like I did. Well, you already have a plot. No one can accuse you of that, Mariah. You had to make a whole plot. Do you have more Jane plots in you?
Oh yeah, I can tell you, I have several plots. I can tell you what she's doing through the Second World War, not every year. But with the very first book, Death of No Importance, Minotaur called me in and they said, would you consider making this a series? For me, I have been writing young adult novels, so I was not actually sure I could write a historical mystery. I was very worried about having the world building skills. And I said, I will write this series until I'm 95 years old. Yes, please. I will do a series. So yeah, no, I have a lot of ideas for where Jane and the other characters can go. I never intended that Louise would be such a nuanced character over so many books, and that her personal growth arc would become significant, but she's become one of the most popular characters in the series, which is nice, because she starts off.
Yeah, she starts out sort of insipid, but she gets great. A great example of a character getting out of the control of the author. You always think that people, think, oh, these people are under my control. But if you follow them naturally, then you see them go off on their own. And I too really love Louise. When you're building your plots for an individual book, which part do you find easiest? The beginning? The middle?
The beginning is always fun because no mystery writer will say the middle. The middle is hell. The beginning is always easy because I love playing with characters. It's literally like opening up some massive box of, toy figurines, and you're like, oh, look at this one, and we can put the clothes on this one, and they can be really mean, but it's because of this. So the first 5 chapters where I'm building the conflicts and the characters, that's just pure fun because you don't have to worry about dropping the necklace that shouldn't be there at that point, and then the end is usually pretty easy because you have the big reveal. I always know who did it at the beginning. I'm not one of those people. So I think of it as like crossing a roaring river by putting rocks as a bridge all the way across. And I always have enough to get like a fourth of the way into the river, and I can see the few at the other end of the river, and then it's just like, okay, what do we do now? Because with an amateur detective, part of the trick is having them be wrong, but not stupidly wrong, and fully engaged in like, I know the next thing I have to find out because I really suspect so and so. But if they figure it out on page 100, you're left nowhere. So.
Well, I admire it. I find the beginnings of books very hard. The first
Okay.
5, yeah, just setting it all up, like making I think for a novel, you always have to establish what the stakes are. With a mystery, you know, it does have a kind of, you know, natural stakes. Someone's dead, you know. Or in murder mystery, someone is dead. But I was intrigued to hear, Mariah, that your next book, you're going to take a little hiatus from Jane and write a piece of a different piece. You're going to get into my area of pure historical fiction.
Yes, so I have actually questions for you. Yes, the next book is sort of a turning point book in the series, so I want to take my time with it. And I have always been obsessed with true crime and the Lindbergh kidnapping in particular. And there's that amazing scene in the opening of the Murder on the Orient Express film, which is of course based on
the original one from 1974.
Yes, that one.
I'm not sure. At all.
No, I don't either. I can't. Sorry, Kenneth, it's not good. But where they show the nanny sort of struggling and tied up, and I was intrigued to learn that Agatha Christie wrote that partly out of outrage because one of the family staff actually killed themselves, as they do in the book. And I thought, we've never really looked at what happened to the Lindbergh and the Morrow, her family, the Morrow staff. And I started looking at the person who was the nanny for the baby at the time. And her story is extraordinary. Her name was Betty Gow. She was from Scotland, in the country 2 years, 3 years, young, very pretty. And she was accused of the crime. Her boyfriend was accused of the crime. She was the last person to see Charlie alive. And she just had a horrific ordeal with all of this. And to look at, all of the staff in the two households and think it is actually very odd that someone knew that the family and the baby would be at this particular house on that night.
That's right. That's why they thought it was maybe an inside job in some ways, because the young Lindbergh couple wasn't always down near Princeton. They were often up at the Morrow's house right in Englewood.
Right.
Well, I'm interested that, again, you're choosing the perspective of the servant. Betty Gow is going to be a different personality than Jane.
If only because she's a real human being and you feel like you have to, she is, also a very different person, but the responsibilities I find as a writer are very different. I was going to ask you because, the case is so complex. Right? Like there are so many police departments involved, so many people involved. There were hoaxers. It was awful. Were there elements of Vicky's story and Fritz's story where you just said, I can't even deal with this, like theories and,
That's right. My book is about Vicky, who was Queen Victoria's daughter, and her husband, Fritz, the later the German emperor, the parents of the Kaiser. There is so much stuff, whirling around them from the time they were first married, because the future of Germany, about what kind of a country it was going to be. So you kind of have to pick a strand. You kind of have to have a take. And then you decide the most important things that happened and the things that really made an impact on the way they took action and then looked at the world and the way they parented young Wilhelm to disastrous results in some cases. You pick your strand and you let some things go, because no historical novel can really recreate all of the way real life has all sorts of different strands. I think Hilary Mantel in her Cromwell books is a great practitioner of that. She has picked an interpretation, right? Thomas Cromwell, not so bad. And,
Right.
and she follows it. And of course, by using the close third, you only see things through his eyes. So that makes you think, yeah, not so bad. What would you do if you were in his shoes? So right. I have followed the Lindbergh case I'm very interested in it, like lots of Americans. That's why I think it's a great topic. But I will be interested to have your take on it, Mariah. Fiction is not history. Fiction is,
right.
Although I do think sometimes historical fiction can capture the truth that biographers or detectives, people who do who recount the police work can't, because they have just the facts doesn't really capture the way it was, what it felt like to be there.
Right. And there are episodes that after months and months of digging, I haven't seen depicted in any account of this particular crime and the investigation. There are so many emotional points in the story. I mean, before Charlie is kidnapped, afterward. But one thing I was thinking when you were talking about Hilary Mantel is that you can have your point of view and your thread, and you do in your book. But one thing I love about both of your work is, yes, I'm seeing it through Vicky's eyes, or yes, we're seeing it through Cromwell's eyes, but you are aware of their bias.
Yeah.
Like the other characters have a fully fleshed out reality. I find she hates Thomas More, but I didn't hate him entirely. He was still a complex character, and I felt the same way about, say, Bismarck in your book. So.
Thank you. I hope I succeeded. After all, it wouldn't be much good if Bismarck was a flat evil person, or if Thomas More had no dimension.
Right.
And like all of us, Vicky and Thomas Cromwell had real flaws. I remember about Betty. One thing I remember about Betty the nanny is, maybe you saw this already, that when Lindbergh couldn't find the baby, he said to her, is the baby not, she thought he was joking with her. The baby's not upstairs. Don't joke. She was so upset.
Right.
But then the baby
Right.
really wasn't upstairs.
Well, when Scott Berg, Lindbergh's biographer, visited her, she said that Lindbergh had a bit of a sadistic streak. And one of the ways that he showed it was that he would hide the baby.
Oh.
And they were very, he and Anne subscribed to the Watson method of child rearing, and they really wanted Charlie to be independent and not have Betty or them hovering over him. So they would leave him outside in kind of a playpen for hours. And she would say, I can't take it, I have to go to the baby. So I always wonder if he did that just to sort of show, no, he will not be under your gaze at all times. So yes, she found the baby missing, goes running downstairs, and she says, Colonel Lindbergh, do you have the baby? She said, please don't fool me.
Oh, I see. That, yeah.
But
this is going to be a really interesting palate cleanser for. I'm sure it's going to be a great book. But you might return to Jane with appreciation or palate. It's lovely you can toggle back and forth from purely fictional to historical fiction.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting writing about the 30s. I didn't know how attached I had gotten to the Gilded Age. Because, you know, in the America in the 30s, like the world in the 30s, is a very unhappy, chaotic place, and you don't have that dynamism and progressivism and you know, just optimism of the late Gilded Age. And so I do miss it. And I miss Jane. She's good company. Betty is fascinating though, but I do miss Jane.
Well, I have one more question for you, and then I think people in the audience can't monopolize you any longer. One thing that I really thought is wonderful about your work is the vivid pictures that you do paint of these of the Gilded Age scene, especially the theater.
Thank you.
Did you get to see the theater?
I did, and if we have time, I would love to show some slides. I thought, I live in New York. I should be able to get inside a Gilded Age theater because obviously I've been to the theater thousands of times, but I don't really understand it as a place of work.
Right.
And so I put out the call to friends, and they got me into the Velasco Theater, which was built in 1907. And by David Velasco, whose ghost is said to haunt it to this day. And the wonderful Brian Amon, the stage manager, gave me a wonderful tour. And if I can share my screen, I will share some images from that.
Yes, you know,
I just gave you the power, so you should be able to.
Oh, wonderful, thank you.
For the Gilded Age in New York, the theaters were the height of glory. I mean, after all, that was the height of art. You know, we didn't have the big spectacles, we didn't have the big movies. Here we go.
Right. Let's see. All right, here is the Velasco.
Yes.
And is this going to be annoying? So that is the Velasco, and he said he wanted it to look like somebody's living room. As you can see, it's a very luxurious living room, and here is the art with the more titillating Greek myths and the gorgeous glass. And here is something that just is on a pedestal near the orchestra seats. And here is the ceiling work.
It's an optimistic time because ornateness, it's a cathedral to art, but you know, not tacky is the wrong word, but over the top.
Yeah, I mean, look at this. Yeah, it is. America is really in love with itself during the Gilded Age, and it can be overbearing and obnoxious, but it does have its upsides.
Well, go on. Sorry.
Oh, this is one of the theater has obviously been refurbished several times, but this light fixture dates from the original theater.
Look, they're harking back to the classic Greeks. They see a straight line. These people are not modest.
No. So this ugly thing was a counterweight that they brought in when Harry Houdini was at the theater, and it was meant to be the counterweight in a trick where an elephant would disappear through a trap door. The trick, for whatever reason, the elephant didn't agree, never came off, but the weights were too heavy, and so they just kept them around. One of the things I was interested in was the raw, like the space that hadn't been refurbished that might look a little closer to what it had. And this is one of the dressing rooms, which was upstairs. I had them downstairs in the first draft. Here's another room refurbished. This is just cool. Here are the curtains that they draw between the rest of the lobby and the orchestra. They're not original.
Wow, beautiful.
More gorgeous glass. And more gorgeous glass, as you say, very modest. I was hoping to get in a scene with a fire escape because I love fire escapes, but I failed. But here it is. Here's the
And the original stage door. Amazing.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
now I see the questions are piling up, Mariah, and I want everyone to have a
Okay.
chance. So,
Okay, so I will stop my share.
okay, Rachel, you're taking over, yeah?
Yes. The first question that we got was from Judy, and she asked Mariah, why did you choose this period in which to set your books?
That's a really interesting question. I wanted a time where being a servant was a realistic career choice, but I wanted a time where a woman without financial resources could have mobility that would be believable to have her moving around the city. I wanted a time that would reflect some of our modern anxieties, which, with the massive wealth inequality, lots of immigration bringing dynamism and entrepreneurship, but also a certain amount of, strife between native and immigrant. And if I was going to talk about a crime of the century, I needed a level of media that would be able to whip up popular outrage and horror about a murder. So all that brought me to the Gilded Age.
Thank you. There's a great question here from Beth. Do you think you would ever place Jane during the time period of the 1918-1919 pandemic?
Most certainly. I have plans for Jane. I hadn't thought of the pandemic, obviously, as the key plot point. I'm not even sure. I mean, the books progress year by year, so I guess it'll be another 3 or 4 years. Maybe by then we'll want to engage with stories about the pandemic, because they did make interesting choices about how to handle it in New York that are different. All children learned outside. They have pictures of kids on docks with, a blackboard. And I have a few characters who might go during the pandemic, but we'll see. Maybe I'll spare them.
So your answer to Judy's question earlier brought up a lot of the ways in which the Gilded Age looks a lot like today.
Right.
Did you find it hard in writing to not almost sort of editorialize and talk about the Gilded Age in terms of modern politics?
Well, that's the books start and end with a prologue and an epilogue, and I can get all of I mean, they're set in the 1980s, which is sort of what I think of as our first modern Gilded Age. I do some editorializing. I hope it's not obnoxious. I hope that my agent and editor keep a pretty tight lid on it. But it's, if you're writing about the Tenderloin riot, in which unfortunately, the police of New York City terrorized the Black community for several days, it's impossible not to draw some modern parallels. But readers are smart and they can figure that out. So.
Thanks. What kinds of historical incidents sort of make the cut into your books? How do you decide if you're going to include, one thing that was in the news or another?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Often, I mean, the first step that I do with a book after I figure out the sort of soap opera beats for that book is to look and, no, stupid, what happened in the year 1913 in New York City? And you get the Armory show, and once there starts to be a thematic link between sort of the large events and the smaller, lesser known events, like in the Death of a Showman, obviously you have World War I on the horizon, but you also have the Lexington Avenue bombing, which I had never heard of, which was a building on Lexington Avenue exploded because they were building a bomb to assassinate Rockefeller. So Jane has a good friend, Anna, who's an anarchist. So often what I'm looking for with the smaller events is something that will work as a plot line for her, because I want this sense of sort of growing violence as the series progresses.
It seems like the Broadway of the world that you were researching for this was very different from the Broadway of today. Was there anything that really surprised you in terms of similarities or differences as you were doing that part of your research?
Yeah, that's another really great question. It is different because really what it's starting to just come out of the vaudeville tradition. So I describe Leo's show as a musical, but it's based on an Irving Berlin show called Watch Your Step. And what that essentially was a showcase for Vernon and Irene Castle, and they had a very, very loose plot. But then they'd have local vaudeville stars coming in and just doing their routines. One thing that did really shock me was how modern that show was. It opens in total silence with the cast just standing there, and they start doing percussion with brooms and buckets, and because he wanted something sort of very elemental and modern and stripped down. So that was really quite a shock.
I've got another question for you, Mariah. And congratulations on the 2011 Mary Higgins Clark nomination.
Oh, thank you.
But can you tell us a little bit about sort of the effect from an author's point of view of what happened to your book when the pandemic hit? It came out like right when everyone went into lockdown, right?
Oh God, yeah. Let's see, we had the event was all planned, and then they said, no, we're terribly sorry. The bookstore doesn't feel it's safe. I think mine was one of the first books within my mystery friend group that happened to. So I had to learn Zoom, and I had to hope that I was going to be entertaining on screen and not look horrific. But I have to say, one of the things that I love about the mystery community, and I will say this again and again and again, all due respect to just strict historical fiction authors, the community is amazing. I mean, for people who spend their time writing about murder, they are the kindest, most supportive, enthusiastic writers. And this isn't true of every writer group, I gotta say. And they turned out in a big way. Obviously, and this is why we worship our bookstores and our glorious independent bookstores. Lee Child once told me that you are 8 times more likely to buy a book that you can pick up. So that front table experience that people have when they walk into a book and they just handle it and flip through it, it is hard to live to sell books in that kind of environment, because not everybody knows Jane yet. So I'll be very happy when people can go back and have fun browsing the tables.
I know we will too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We are just about out of time, but I want to know sort of the timeline. When's the Lindbergh book coming out, and when do we have the next Jane? And I'm curious too, is what's coming next for you, Claire?
Mariah, you go first.
Oh, let's see, Lindbergh, I'm about to turn in the rough draft to my agent. That should be out next year, 2022. And then I hope we'll be doing Jane 5, where she takes a break from working with Louise and goes to work for William, who's starting his first law practice. And they get involved in investigating the death of Jane's friend Michael's father, who died in a suspicious work accident many years ago. And Michael is actually really not happy that they're digging around in his past. So I've written like 100 pages of that. I hope I get to continue. Claire?
I feel confident that you will. Well, Daphne, it's Rachel. I had the same experience than Mariah, but I was a first timer. When the pandemic hit, my book was coming out in September, and I thought, oh, everything will be better in September. I feel so sorry for the spring authors. And my book was published simultaneously in the US and in the UK and in Australia and New Zealand and Canada, where we thought there would be a lot of royal fans. And in fact, the sales, proportionally speaking, have been as much abroad as here. And my editors would like me to write another royal book. I'm interested in Vicky's sister, who's called Alice. She's actually the great-grandmother of Prince Philip. So she had a very, also rather colorful life. However, like all writers, I get a little restless. Having proved that I could write a royal book, now I wanted to write pure fiction. I'm writing a novel at the moment that I hope to sell. That hasn't been sold yet. About an Irish American family in the 70s and 80s and 90s, an era I lived through. So of course I know all the vocabulary. But I am inspired by my friendship with Mariah and a few other writers who are sustaining us through this really hard period, because I like to write in cafes. I like to do other things, like go to the gym and see other people while you're writing, and I've missed all of that.
I'm a total hermit, but I'm inspired by your inventiveness and the way that you're going from different topics. I can't wait to read the next book.
Thank you, Mariah.
Well, thank you both so much. You can order a copy of The Death of a Showman at the link from Northshire Bookstore in the chat. Likewise, Rachel's put up the link for A Most English Princess. Mariah, Claire, thank you both so much for a terrific event, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks and good night.
Night.